Okay, so we're back onto the robotic monkey after I want to say about a week. I think it's been about a week since the last time I opened this file and really did something. I did do a few rounds of just like small little edits and little tweaks, but this time I went for just like a full meditation with focus and objective. I really wanted to resolve sort of like what happens when you start to read the face area a bit better. Um, I was getting a bit. It was stuck between clown and just anatomy study, and I wasn't really happy with sort of where it was, sort of so stuck in the middle. So I moved around where the materials are. Kind of changed the material used on the face. So instead of having just like this very light face, I actually end up going very dark, mostly dark, and then just having a lot more orange. So orange is usually my kind of soft support structure. So it's usually like it's usually stuff that's gonna be matte and kind of plasticky. So it like might be hard plastic, might be soft plastic, and that's kind of why I put the orange. Later on, I tend to um, sort of figure out more precisely what I do with the materials I've put in orange, and I do sometimes separate them. But usually it's just like something more matte. And then black tends to be just for the darkness, just something dark. So it can be matte, it can be reflective. It really depends. For this character, I actually see myself using a lot more matte materials and using sort of like the shiny materials as highlights. So here I'm resolving what happens with the nose area. So I've done a few iterations of the nose, and like simply put, it's like robots don't need to breathe. There's a few instances along this project where I'm turning a monkey into a mech, and I'll come across areas like the nose or like the pelvic bone where it's like, well, the entire design of this works if you're a living biological creature. The second you become made of metal and silicone, it's it's kind of not. There really is no need for it. Like on the basin bone, if you sort of think of the basin, right? So you would say like this is the basin, this is your crotch area, this is where your thighs come in. There's like these two they're kind of like cups like up here, right? And they're meant to receive a whole lot of muscles, help support your organs, which this monkey has none of. And so like that entire form, I'm just like, well, I don't really have a reason to put it there. And something similar was happening with the nose for a while because I was kind of going for that like cartilage and all that geometry, and it was just like, but this thing doesn't need to breathe. Like I thought. So right now, I just have it as kind of like just like a vent, and then two sensors underneath for aesthetic. But there just isn't. I mean, your sense of smell. So I was actually looking this up because I thought this was uh like a good question. So it's like what senses develop first, right? So if you think about most creatures, the way that oh wait, no, never mind. I thought I wasn't recording sound for a second. I was about to lose it. Um, no, so anyways, back to what I was saying. Speaking of senses, right? Imagine seeing this with no sound. But yeah, so it was like what senses came first, right? And to my surprise, well, not super surprising. So smell was first, and the thing is that like so it's not exactly smell. So the first sense was done by one cell using one cell, obviously. So it was sort of this like chemical sense of what is near you, and it had this reaction to either go closer to what it was chemically sensing or go further away from what it was chemically sensing. And at the end of the day, that is essentially what smell is, and so it's considered to be a sense of smell, even though it doesn't exactly work like a sense of smell. But smell was essentially the first sense to be developed. There's a specific name for what a single celled organism does. It's like a special kind of sense, if you will. It's like a proto sense was the word, well, the way to describe it. But I just thought that was interesting. You know, like a head is a very kind of cool. Uh, uh, it's a cool part because even if we like to say like, oh, it's one limb, it's like a skull, for example, right? It's actually it has so many parts into it. Even being, well, first of all, your skull is actually a few bones fused together, and then obviously lower jaw, upper jaw are just two separate bones. You know, full stop. But it's kind of interesting how like your skull is essentially, so on your skull, every one of your sensory organs is either there or represented, meaning that you have your eyes, your nose, your taste, and you also have some skin, and you know skin lets you feel. It's where your ears are, it's where your nose is. You know, it's where like pretty much all your senses are. Like all of your senses are on like one extremity of your body, and then your defecation system is on like the complete other end of your body, and in between is a tube with legs. Is essentially like the body plan for all creatures. But there is something really interesting about how sort of like the most forward facing part of every creature tends to be just like where they put all of their senses, like all of the, any sense that they have. It's all just like forward facing. And sort of like a head or a skull is a very cool, kind of like surprisingly complex object because, especially for like a mammalian skull or even just like any actually any animal that has a skull really sort of deals with the same situation where it's like you have to fit the eyes, the respiratory and olfactory system. You have the mouth, and you have to go all the way to feeding, but also the mouth tends to be sort of like a main, one of the main tools of engagement with the outside world. So like a lot of predators and so on, but a lot of animals just in general. Oopsie, I hit the mic. Um, Manipulate things with their mouth, primarily. So that's like really, there's just so much that goes into the head. It's really fascinating. Like I'm thinking of doing actually just a series like exclusively on the head. It's so much architecture repeats, and yet it's such like a very unique um it's such like a very unique part. I really like the head. I really like the skull. I'm glad I spent more time on it. The hands were really fun as well. So here you see me start to put some detail. I keep going back and forth about what I did with that part over there. Um, I have gone back and forth between giving this thing lips and not giving it lips a lot. I think now that I'm thinking about it, I think every time I've opened up this file, I've like changed my mind. Um, I'm gonna need to decide at one point. Because like most of it is just like representing bone, but especially when it comes to the fact that like I kind of wanted to be able to emote. I just thought this actually. I don't mean to cut off, but this was really interesting. So I thought I could shell that, and that just hated my guts trying to shell it. And I think what I'm gonna do is I'm actually gonna extrude the whole thing, because so one thing that like it's funny how like bad habits spawn more bad habits, right? So before, I used to not really pay attention to the topology of my joint surfaces or of my surfaces, and it would lead me often to things that wouldn't extrude and close. They wouldn't extrude into a solid. Um, Ever since I've started just like modeling more specifically with surfaces and curves, I've started to pay attention to that more, and I've actually ended up with surfaces that extrude just fine. Surfaces that I can kind of like have them extrude, then combine them into a solid or close them very simply. But because that wasn't the case, I actually don't have the habit of thinking like, oh, I can just extrude this to make a solid out of it, which is interesting because clearly it's the optimal way of doing it a lot of times. So that's gonna be a bad habit that I'm gonna get rid of and replace it with something that I thought really I wouldn't get the opportunity to do, which is kind of fun, But also it's interesting just to have noticed like, wow, like one bad habit led to another, and like as I like gain a new skill, I have to go back and edit out more than just that bad habit. I don't know. I thought that was interesting because I definitely started to notice it. It's like I've started to rely a lot less on something being a solid, even though like now more than ever, I feel like I can turn whatever I want into a solid. I have like new scripts that let me hunt down edges that aren't actually uh, uh, closed, sort of like where something is opened. I'm a lot more familiar with form. Uh, I understand how forms want to sort of behave depending on the curves that you give it and so on. I understand a lot more how Moi wants to process data. So it's gonna be fun, I think, having that option available and sort of finding those moments now, as opposed to kind of always having to think of a workaround or just assuming like, yeah, I can't do that. Um, never say never, right? So here at this point, I've sort of gone through what I wanted to do for the most part that night. I still feel like this particular area will need some resolving, but I feel like the skull in general feels like a lot more cohesive. It has better flow, and I'm starting to sort of understand how I'm gonna break this up and materialize it later on. The entire spine area and the cavity in which the spine will enter. The I've decided on kind of like the back of the head a little bit more as opposed to a bottom. Um, Even though I might still change that. See, my thing is like, do I necessarily want this guy to stand up? Because that's really what bottom of the bottom spine insert versus back of the head spine insert is going to determine. It's whether or not this creature will be able to uh, stand up, right, like a human, or if it will sort of just forever be a quadruped, like a monkey. And what's funny is like if I just go for it to be instead at the bottom, it can do both. But I don't know why I am very tempted to kind of just commit to that quadruped. Uh, I don't know. That's something I'm gonna have to think on. But because as far as function, um, I just get more. If this were in real life, we would just get more out of having the ability to walk upright as well as walking on four legs, especially being a robot. Like us walking on four legs is kind of difficult. Our joints don't really do that anymore, but this thing has absurd flexibility. That to the point actually where it is kind of weird that it's so tempting to completely reduce this flexibility like that. I don't know. The more I think about it, the more I don't really like the idea. Um, but I think at this point that just needs to be the next the next big step to figure out is what what goes on with the spine, how does it work. um I almost didn't have a spine because this universe uses magnets so much. um I'm glad I didn't, because I think the spine aesthetic looks amazing. I think having just like, it's, a floating basin, and then like a floating torso, and being like, it's helped together by magnetism and it's invisible. I'm like, no. Or having like a lightning bolt in between or something. I'm glad I didn't go that route. But yeah, I think I need to figure out what I'm gonna do with that spine and how I'm gonna go about that. Um, yeah, but those were sort of my thoughts before heading out. So yeah, catch you guys later.